The coronavirus pandemic has created chaos around the globe with concerns over health, also concerns over the economic impact it's having on businesses and their employees. Government restrictions are shutting down many companies. Now, how is this really impacting in Lethbridge? Joining me now to talk about it is Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. Trevor, welcome back to BCN.
Thanks for having me once again.
Now, every city in Canada is impacted by this huge pandemic. Do we have any idea how Lethbridge is doing so far economically compared to other cities around the country?
I think like most other cities across the country, Lethbridge is going to feel a deep impact. It's going to be widespread. We have two particular challenges in Lethbridge that make us a little bit different. First, our proportion of small or family-based businesses is about half. So half the businesses in the city have 5 employees or less. Most of those companies with that kind of size don't necessarily have the cash flows or the bench strength to withstand a major disruption like this for a long period of time. And the second challenge is really around the suspension of classes at both the college and university from an in-person perspective. Many of those students have left town, and that's a significant part of our population, particularly folks that are willing to spend on restaurants and bars and entertainment options. So we have a bit of a double whammy with those two factors in mind.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the specific businesses. You mentioned the college, the university, restaurants, theaters as well, and I guess some retail stores also feeling the pinch.
Yeah, most impacted certainly are the sort of public-facing businesses that we think of, like gyms, like bars, like restaurants. There was some polling done today by another media outlet that actually talked specifically that even those businesses that are still open are seeing traffic declines of 70 to 80%. So even restaurants that are still doing takeout or delivery services, it's a fraction of what they would normally do, and yet your fixed operating costs don't go away. So significant challenge for business owners.
So what are you hearing specifically from these business owners? Most of them still need to pay rent, utilities, or interest on any loans they have, but there's no income coming in. Are landlords maybe giving them a break in their leases?
Well, we are hearing a variety of stories. There are some landlords that have been a little bit more flexible, either a break on a lease or a deferral. The challenge is many of these landlords themselves are a business, and their revenue, of course, is rental income by which they use to pay their bills. So it does affect commercial landlords in the same way that it affects their tenants. The biggest thing that we've heard is cash flows. There's sort of a rule of thumb in business that 1 in 4 businesses in Canada can't withstand a disruption of longer than 30 days. And so 1 in 4 businesses, 25% potentially could fail if they don't have operations within a month. And that number jumps to almost 75% could fail if that extends to 60 days. So finding ways for local businesses to free up cash is a focus for government, should be a focus for all of us. We want to make sure those businesses can survive through this.
When I was talking with Len Binning, the owner of the Movie Mill, he said the same thing too. He says a couple of months is one thing, but like 3 or 4 months down the road, he doesn't know if he can make it, like a lot of other business owners. Have you heard any interesting stories from locals as to how they're making adjustments to keep their businesses going during this pandemic?
Yeah, there's been, Lethbridge, I think, as you know, is a very innovative community. There's lots of creative people here, and we are seeing some of those businesses emerge. I know, for example, Mocha Cabana is a local bistro restaurant. They source a number of locally provided goods, but they have a home meal kit delivery service that they've scaled up. They're actually doing groceries from their farmers market. So talking to the owners there just this morning, they've almost quadrupled their home-based delivery business compared to the prior. So it certainly doesn't offset the fact that their restaurant is closed, but that's an example. We've seen a lot of gyms. So, I know that my trainer, I've been avoiding as much as I can the visual face-to-face conferences. But, a lot of gyms are actually providing one-on-one coaching over Skype and other technologies. They're offering classes and work-at-home routines for their clients. So staying connected with their audience, even though people can't physically come to work. So there's many examples of people embracing those different technologies and finding just another solution to still carry on business. My team specifically, we had a business continuity plan in place, and we were able to have everybody work from home all of last week. So it's not quite the same, but we're still talking to clients, we're still serving needs, we're still holding virtual meetings and touching base every day. So there are some ways to work around this for some businesses.
How is the pandemic really impacting the manufacturing and construction sectors?
Yeah, 2 key sectors in our community for sure. A number of our manufacturers are actually looking to retool their lines. So several have answered the call from the federal government to provide supplies for this pandemic response. So for example, There's one local manufacturer that is looking at one of their production lines to make all of the alcohol-based wipes and all of the alcohol-based gels that are required that are in short supply. So again, it won't take the place of their regular everyday business, but this way they can generate revenues and they can retool to support the pandemic response. A number of our local food manufacturers are, of course, key to the supply chain for keeping grocery stores well stocked. So most of them continue to work with their staff to have alternative crewing arrangements. Ensuring a consistent supply of all of our agri-food products is absolutely key.
You know, it's interesting with a lot of those grocery stores as well. Walmart hiring 10,000 more Canadians to help keep up with the demand, temporary workers. I mean, Save-On's doing the same thing, Safeway. So in one sense, you know, some businesses are still thriving. Now, what kind of help is available from different levels of government for small business owners to help them with their rent, utilities, or to keep a lot of their remaining employees?
Yeah, so each level of government is rolling out programs as we speak. A number of announcements followed this week, as you know, as early as today, with respect to being approved by the federal parliament. From a municipal perspective, many municipalities are looking at the deferral of utility payments, looking alternatives payment strategies. I think it's important to note, though, that those are deferrals. They're not reductions or cancellations. So at some point, 3 months from now, that bill still comes due. So although it helps certainly with cash flow, it doesn't solve the immediate problem of these businesses to have actual more money in their bank accounts long term. The province has announced changes to WCB premiums. The province is deferring WCB payments, for example, to 2021, and the province is paying half of the premiums themselves, offsetting that cost for business. There's also going to be some changes to the commercial side of property taxes, the education component, and the provincial government is working right now furiously with municipal governments to reconcile how that might work. And from a federal level, there are a number of support programs. So I think it's key for all businesses to make sure they clearly understand what's available to them, to research those different programs, but be mindful that it's going to take many weeks for them to see payments. A lot of these programs have just been approved literally within hours of us talking, and so it takes a while to stand up all the administration and the application processes that are required.
So the business owners you've spoken with, are they really saying that there's enough help, or do you think maybe different levels of government should be doing more?
You know, it's a great question. Economic Developers of Alberta conducted a survey province-wide, and they released some of the results just today, actually. And almost 2/3, so about 66% of employers have already laid off staff and plan further reductions in their workforce. That's very significant. Another 60% or so indicate that the financial supports they've received already are just not sufficient. And again, it comes down to many government programs are the extensions of deferral programs, which put off payments, or their loans, their expansion of credit facilities. And what we saw with the disasters in Fort McMurray and High River is that often, 6, 9, 12 months from now, when these loans come due, businesses, in fact, you get a second wave of failures. What we need to see is more governments providing cash in hand, finding ways to support business so that they can in turn put that money into their business and into their staff.
Have you heard of any local business owners planning on maybe going out of business or declaring bankruptcy at this point?
Yeah, I think it's still a little too early to know sort of what those impacts are. I've not personally been approached by anyone who's sort of taken it to that extreme, but certainly it's on the minds of businesses. A lot of business owners have commented the fact that they don't feel they'll be able to survive if this goes on for an extended period of time. So it's definitely a concern out there in the community.
So what kind of feedback are you really getting from the local business owners? How long do they realistically think they can stay in business under the current restrictions? Like we said, 1 month, 2 months, maybe longer?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, as I said, much smaller businesses in Lethbridge proportionally than everywhere else, and many of them have indicated that it's potentially a couple of weeks. So that's the part that concerns me. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, of course, has indicated that we will not see the peak of infections in this province for at least 4 weeks, meaning that, social distancing restrictions and other challenges will be in place for much longer than that. So it worries me when I hear business owners talking about, well, I can survive a few weeks. We are talking months. And I think, that's the concern. And most businesses have indicated that's going to cause a lot of stress to them.
Assuming that this pandemic clears up over the next few months, what are you hearing from locals as to how long it'll take to get business volumes back to normal?
Well, I think we've heard a number of politicians talk about, quote, the new normal. That's been in the public discourse a lot in the last few weeks. And I think this is, in some ways, a structural reset. So, similar to the oil and gas sector, when oil prices crashed a number of years ago, they never quite retooled the same way. They never went back to those same pre crash employment levels. And I think this is going to be similar because it's so widespread. I think businesses are going to think of ways to do business differently. They're going to look at alternatives. They're going to look at online platforms, perhaps instead of in-person meetings. I think fundamentally the landscape is going to look completely different than it does today. So I don't know that it's going to be necessarily the same as it was. It's going to be different moving forward.
We are very much an agriculture-based economy here in southwestern Alberta, in and around Lethbridge. What have you heard from farmers and ranchers so far?
That is in many ways and has always been our saving grace in this region of the province. Of course, we have a much more diversified economy that is supported by a strong agricultural sector. The good news from many farmers that I've talked to is that they see the border controls as being appropriate to limit the movement of people, but still allow trade and commerce. And I think we're very fortunate that the Canadian and US governments have been able to sort some sort of arrangement that allows commerce to continue. The vast majority of our exports, of course, go south. So a significant and permanent closure of the border that's more robust than it is today would have been devastating to the ag community. The biggest challenge coming from the ag sector that I've heard is around the temporary foreign worker program. So there's concerns that our producers may not be able to seed or get their crops in the ground without appropriate labor force. And there have been although foreign workers are not restricted from entering the country if they have the appropriate permits right now, there are some examples here and there where individual border officials have maybe not read the memo or perhaps not enforcing the policies consistently. So for the ag sector, that's a big concern to make sure that their labor force is available to them.
Trevor, are there any coronavirus scams happening in our city that business owners or consumers need to be made aware of?
Yeah, as sad as that is, and quite frankly, I think it's disgusting that people would seek to take advantage of people at a time like this and take advantage of those that are perhaps most vulnerable. There are definitely scams that are going around. Alberta Health has made people aware that some people are getting phone calls ostensibly from a representative of Alberta Health requesting personal and credit card information in order to get their test results. That is not how it works. People need to be very clear. I think, as with all scams, if a consumer ever has a question, make sure you call the business, look at your bill, phone the actual contact number and information that you have. Always ask for verification. And if it doesn't quite sound right, chances are it probably isn't.
How important is it really right now for residents to buy local and support our local producers here?
Yeah, buying local always makes sense from an economic perspective. I'll admit that I'm wholeheartedly biased as the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. But the math tells us that for every $1 that's spent locally in the economy, it has a multiplier effect of creating 7 new additional dollars. Local businesses tend to hire local people. They invest in local events. They tend to buy local supplies. So every dollar that you spend with local businesses, and that can include locally owned franchises, not necessarily just local brands, but every $1 creates 7 more in the economy. And the more we can support local businesses, the faster we can recover from this together. And that's things like buying memberships or buying gift cards in advance that creates some businesses with cash flow, even if you don't plan to use those services and perhaps even while they're closed.
Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.